Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
As I walked down my driveway for the last time, a weight settled in my chest, and I couldn't help but wonder if there was something I could have done differently to save my marriage. How could I have kept my wife, the woman I loved more than anything, the one I thought I'd grow old with, from seeking comfort in another man's arms? How could she still profess her undying love for me after not only sleeping with him, but begging him to make love to her again and again? Her cries of pleasure echoing in my mind like a cruel mockery. I could feel tears welling up, but I forced them back as I made my way to my trusted truck. Opening the door, I was flooded with memories of my desperate attempts to prevent this very moment. It felt like only yesterday that I had warned my wife to stay away from Brian Collins, the slick, smooth-talking charmer known throughout our small town. Brian was wealthy, popular, and infamous for his affairs. Despite his reputation, my wife often crossed paths with him because of her cafe and bakery. Her passion project, not something we needed for the money, but something that brought her joy and a chance to connect with people. I, on the other hand, ran a successful computer consulting firm and served in the Army Reserve. Like so many others, I was called up for active duty during the height of our country's involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan. That deployment took me away from home, from her, for far too long, leaving a gap that someone like Brian Collins was all too eager to fill. I remember the call vividly, one of the rare moments I managed to reach Eleanor while I was overseas. She was excited, almost breathless, as she told me she'd made an amazing new friend. Someone who truly understood her and had endless stories to share about the people in town and all the fascinating places he had traveled to. I should have known then, but I didn't want to believe it. Yes, it was none other than Brian Collins. I tried to keep my voice steady as I told her to be careful around him. That man only has one goal, I warned her. He's charming, yes, but all he wants is to get into your pants. You're not the first to fall for his act. Eleanor brushed it off, insisting that I was wrong. Brian isn't like that, she said, almost offended by the suggestion. He's just misunderstood because he's kind to everyone. He's only being friendly. I still remember how my stomach twisted as I responded. Just be careful, Eleanor. Keep your distance. I couldn't bear knowing you were another one of his conquests. If that ever happened, it would destroy everything we've built together. That's when things took a turn. Her voice grew colder, sharper. I don't need you telling me who I can or can't be friends with, she snapped. You have plenty of friends I don't like, and I've learned to live with it. Now, it's your turn to accept that I can have friends you don't approve of. I felt a surge of anger and desperation. I can deal with him as your friend if you force me to. But if he ever becomes your lover, I warned, my voice rising, I'll throw you out. And I don't ever want to hear of him stepping foot in my house. Her response was immediate and venomous. You son of a bitch, she shouted. It's my house too, and I'll have whoever I want over whenever I damn well please. And with that, she hung up on me, leaving me in the sweltering desert heat with nothing but the sound of the dial tone and a growing rage. I tried calling her back right away, but the line just rang and rang. No answer. I stood there, staring at the phone in frustration, knowing that there was a line of soldiers behind me waiting for their turn to call home. With a sigh, I gave up my spot to the next man and walked out of the phone center, my mind racing. A couple of my friends were lingering nearby and must have seen something in my expression. Hey, Tom, everything all right? One of them asked. I forced a smile, shaking my head. Nah, it's nothing, I lied, trying to brush it off. But the weight of it all was too heavy to carry alone, and after a few minutes of walking in silence, we ended up in a small coffee shop. That's when the questions started again, this time with a tone of genuine concern. And finally, I caved. I told them everything about Eleanor, Brian Collins, and the gut-wrenching phone call that had just ended in a shouting match. LTC Dale Sanford, my battalion commander, who knew me well as his executive officer, leaned back in his chair and let out a low whistle. Oh shit, Tom, he said. I live nearly 70 miles from you, and even I've heard about that scumsucker. You've got a real problem on your hands. If that snake ever gets her alone. Roy White, our supply officer and a good friend both in and out of uniform, looked at me with concern. What are you going to do, Tom? He asked quietly. I shook my head, frustration boiling up. What can I do, Roy? I said bitterly. I'm thousands of miles away. I guess I'm just going to have to spend the last 3 months of this damn tour worrying about whose bed my wife is sleeping in, won't I? We sat there for a few more moments, letting the silence speak louder than words. Eventually, we finished our coffee and went back to the grind of duty, each of us knowing that in war, the battles at home can be just as devastating as the ones in the field. A few days later, Roy came to my office, knocking softly on the door. "Got a minute to talk?" he asked, a hesitant look in his eyes. My first thought was selfish. I already had enough on my plate. Why did I need someone else's problems right now? But I quickly pushed that thought aside. As the executive officer, it was my job to support my officers, and Roy was one of my best men, both here and in our civilian lives. So, I forced a smile and motioned for him to come in. "Sure, Roy," I said, gesturing to the chair in front of my desk. "Take a seat. What's on your mind?" "Major, I wasn't sure if I should even bring this up, but I got a letter from my wife yesterday, and, well, I think you need to read part of it," Roy said hesitantly, handing me a sheet of paper. I leaned forward and took it from his hand, my heart pounding as I scanned the lines. My eyes quickly fell to the section highlighted in yellow. "Honey, I don't know how to tell you this, but I saw something very upsetting yesterday. I was leaving my office and spotted Eleanor Sanders with Brian Collins. They came out of the dining room together, and instead of leaving, he put his arm around her, and they went into the elevator, heading upstairs. Do you think Tom and Eleanor are having problems? Should we say something?" Roy's wife, Jasmine, managed the Holiday Inn in a town about 40 miles from where we lived, so there was no doubt in my mind that what she'd seen was real. I just sat there, numb. My vision blurred as tears streamed down my cheeks, and before I knew it, I had crumpled Roy's letter in my fist. Anger, disbelief, and a sickening sense of betrayal swirled through me. For how long, I didn't know. I was lost in a daze of denial until Roy's voice broke through the fog. "Tom, Tom," he called, concern heavy in his tone. The next thing I knew, LTC Sanford entered my office, assessing the situation quickly. After Roy explained what was in the letter, Sanford shut the door behind him and took a seat. "Tom, you need to get a grip," he said firmly, placing a small flask in my hand. I looked down, startled to find a shot of contraband whiskey. The shock of it brought me back to my senses, if only for a moment. I took a sip, feeling the burn as it slid down my throat, grounding me in the reality of the moment. I sat there, staring blankly at my two friends, the silence thick between us. Dale looked at me with a calm but serious expression. "Tom, whatever you decide to do about this, whether or not she actually did anything wrong, is up to you. But between your connections and mine, we can dig deeper and find out if this is truly an affair or just looks like one. What do you want to do? Should we discreetly investigate? Or would you rather wait until you're back home?" I took a few moments to process everything, the weight of the decision bearing down on me. Finally, I spoke, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside. "I want proof. If she's screwing that son of a bitch, I want to divorce her for it, and I'll make his life a living hell." Dale nodded, his face hardening with resolve. "All right, Tom. I've got friends who owe me some favors. Between them and your people, we'll figure out exactly what's going on. Roy and I will handle the legwork. For now, why don't you take the rest of the day off and clear your head? I was actually coming to tell you that we've got our rotation date. 6 weeks from now, we're heading back to Fort Lewis for out-processing. By the time we're done there, we'll have answers." True to their word, they didn't waste time. I was sent back a few days earlier than the main group as the commander of the advance party, and soon after I landed, I got the call. The investigation had turned up something, and arrangements were made for me to meet one of Dale's contacts in Seattle. I even covered the airfare for Brent Jackson, one of Dale's most trusted friends. Brent met me at the airport, a large briefcase in hand. We went straight to a hotel, where he was prepared to deliver his report. As we sat down, he opened the briefcase to reveal folders stuffed with evidence, and I could already feel a sick sense of dread crawling up my spine. I thought I was prepared, but nothing could have braced me for what I was about to see. Even as Brent laid out the damning photos in front of me, my gut twisted with a mix of rage and heartbreak. And yet, when my eyes landed on Eleanor, my beautiful wife, captured in those images, a part of me still ached for her. For a split second, my body betrayed me. I felt a flicker of desire, a longing to hold her, even as the truth crushed me. There were countless photos of Eleanor and Brian together, but the one that will forever be etched in my mind was taken in the Holiday Inn where Roy's wife, Jasmine, managed the place. It turned out that Jasmine had joined the effort to uncover the truth, giving our friends access to one of the rooms Eleanor and Brian were using. They had discreetly set up cameras to capture everything, and the evidence was damning, painfully vivid. As I flipped through the pictures, I could hardly breathe. In one of the shots, they hadn't even managed to close the door before they were wrapped around each other, frantically undressing. Once fully exposed, they fell into a deep, almost desperate kiss, with Brian guiding Eleanor backward toward the bed. I watched in stunned silence as the photos revealed Eleanor having sex with Brian. I couldn't stop the rush of bitterness as I noticed how she had shaved for him, a detail she never bothered with for me. The sound of her moans and gasps filled the room, echoing through the video evidence Brent had brought. I heard her voice, breathless and urgent, pleading, "Brian, please, stop teasing. Just do me. I need it so badly." I saw them have sex, and it was like she twisted a knife in my chest. I should have turned it off. I should have looked away, but I couldn't. Instead, I just sat there, numb, as everything I once believed in crumbled before my eyes. After Brian had finished, he propped himself up on his arms for a moment, then leaned down to kiss Eleanor. They exchanged a few words I couldn't make out, but her soft giggle was unmistakable. Once Brian rolled off her, he lay beside her for a few minutes, catching his breath. Then, he turned to Eleanor with a sly grin. "You ready for that party I promised you, honey?" he asked. She looked at him, confused. "I thought that was the party," she said, still panting. He chuckled. "Oh, no, sweetheart, that was just the warm-up. Remember when I mentioned I had a couple of buddies who thought you were hot and wanted a piece of you? Well, today's your lucky day. I told them how worked up you were with good old Tom overseas, and we decided to give you a night you'd never forget, or at least one you'll remember until we do it again." Before she could respond, Brian reached for his phone on the nightstand, dialed a number, and said, "All right, boys. She's good and ready. Come on in." He placed the phone down with a satisfied smile. The adjoining door to the hotel room swung open, revealing two men. They approached the bed without hesitation, eyes locked on Eleanor. What followed was nothing short of an orgy. The photos Brent showed me didn't stop there. Some captured Eleanor and Brian having sex in the bed we once shared, while others were taken in various locations around town. Each image was like a knife twisting deeper into my gut. By the time I'd seen enough, I was consumed with a rage so intense it was terrifying. If I hadn't been nearly 2,000 miles away, I might have done something reckless. But Brent was there, calmly bringing me back to reality. He suggested we go grab dinner, and though I was in no state to eat, I agreed. Over the meal, Brent explained why he had come himself. He was not just a friend of Dale's but also a divorce attorney. Dale had asked him to handle my case if I approved, which I did without hesitation. We immediately started discussing a strategy. I granted him power of attorney to take whatever steps were necessary, ready to let him dismantle whatever was left of my marriage. In some twisted way, I almost regretted that Eleanor had her own business, because it meant I wouldn't leave her completely destitute. But, on the flip side, it was also a relief. Brent believed that her independent income might protect my consulting business from being dragged into the divorce proceedings. Once I had read that damning letter from Jasmine, I had already started preparing for this inevitable outcome. Quietly, I'd been transferring money out of the country for months. The funds were routed through Iraq, then vanished into offshore accounts. To cover my tracks, I enlisted a few friends who had been sending Eleanor letters, complaining about how I was supposedly losing money in friendly poker games. They told her I had developed a careless attitude, gambling as if I didn't care whether I won or lost. By the time she realized what was happening, our joint bank accounts were drained, and I had even taken out loans against our shared business. All those funds were now safely stashed in a bank in Abu Dhabi, well beyond her reach. Once the divorce was finalized, I could bring the money back stateside, ensuring I'd come out well ahead financially, even if I lost her as my wife and lover. As much as it hurt to be betrayed, I found myself anticipating what would unfold over the next few hours. My team and I had wired our home that morning, and now, sitting in my hotel room, I was glued to the computer monitor, watching it all play out live. The moment Eleanor walked through the door, I heard her exclaim, "What the hell?" My first thought, even now, was how stunning she looked. But then I couldn't help but notice how provocatively she was dressed, far sexier than anything she'd ever worn for me. My rage simmered beneath the surface, but I forced myself to stay composed, leaning back to watch the rest of the drama unfold. Eleanor stood frozen in the middle of the room, her eyes widening as she took in the noticeable gaps where furniture and personal items were missing. Panic flickered across her face as she darted from room to room, realizing that most of what was gone belonged to me. My cherished keepsakes, my furniture. By the time she reached our bedroom, the reality must have been sinking in. When she returned to the living room, she was holding one of the notes we had carefully left taped in various spots around the house. The message was short and simple. Play the CD in the player. Her expression turned ashen, as if she already had an inkling of what was coming. With trembling hands, She turned on the CD player and slowly sank into a chair, her eyes fixed on the screen. The first scene showed me standing in uniform, staring straight into the camera. Hello, Eleanor. By now, I'm sure you've discovered that my unit returned home safely. And I bet, being the clever woman you think you are, you're starting to realize you weren't nearly as smart or as careful as you believed while I was away. I paused for a moment, letting the weight of my words sink in. I want you to know that I really, truly didn't enjoy the show, but I've kept it on CD for you. So, enjoy it with your new best friend. As the video of me faded out, the screen transitioned to a scene of Eleanor at the Holiday Inn, surrounded by an atmosphere of intense emotion. The footage captured her engaging closely with others, her expression filled with fervor and energy, leaving no doubt she was caught up in the moment. A few seconds later, my image reappeared on the screen. Now, Eleanor, I said calmly, you should answer the door. Eleanor's face shifted from confusion to shock just as the doorbell rang, perfectly timed with the end of the video. I watched her hesitate on the screen, clearly dreading what awaited her on the other side. With visible reluctance, she slowly walked to the front door. Through the web camera, I saw the process server standing there. Eleanor Sanders? He asked. Eleanor gave a shaky nod. Yes, she managed to reply. The man handed her a thick stack of papers. You've been served, he said firmly. These documents include a summons for divorce and a restraining order. You are required to stay at least 1 block away from Mr. Tom Sanders and any businesses or properties in which he has an interest. Do you understand? Eleanor's eyes widened in disbelief as she stared at the papers. Then, as the weight of it hit her, she collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Oh no, no, she wailed. The server, unfazed, repeated his question. Mrs. Sanders, do you understand the contents of what you've been served? Eleanor finally looked up, tears streaming down her face, and gave a faint nod, whispering, yes. As soon as the door closed, my cell phone started ringing. I watched through the monitor as Eleanor desperately dialed my number, her frustration growing when she was met with silence on my end. She eventually slammed the phone down in frustration. We turned off the live feed and sat back, letting the weight of the moment settle. The calls continued throughout the night, first from Eleanor, then from her mother, and even a pleading message from someone claiming to be her minister. I ignored every single one. After a week of unwinding, I returned to work. Though my business hadn't expanded during my absence, my team had done an impressive job maintaining our existing contracts and keeping our clients satisfied. Roy and I received a warm welcome upon our return. Following a general staff meeting, we held private debriefings with department heads. As the chief financial officer was about to leave the room, he hesitated, then quietly closed the door behind him, turning back with a serious expression. Tom, Harold began, his voice serious. I've been with this company since the start, and we've been friends as well as business partners, so I feel I need to be upfront. Eleanor's come to me a couple of times asking for money. I gave her some once, and then, when I noticed the accounts were being drawn down, I heard rumors that you gambled the funds away. I always thought you were a sharper card player and a smarter businessman than that. Now, it seems like we're barely scraping by. I need to know, is this going to be an ongoing issue? I exchanged a quick look with Roy before turning back to Harold. Harold, I can put your mind at ease. Yes, there were some issues on my end, and I needed the money for a time, but everything is under control now. The company is secure. Roy and I are back, and things will stabilize soon. We may have a few rough months, but if you stick with me, we'll get back on track. Harold still seemed concerned. Tom, I need to know if there's anything that might affect our financial stability. I don't mean to pry, but... Okay, Harold, I sighed, trying to calm him. I guess you deserve to know. Eleanor and I are separating. While I was over there, I admit I let things get out of hand. I drank a little too much and made some poor choices, including pulling from company funds. But let's be clear, I own the company, so technically, it's mine. That said, I made sure to leave enough for daily operations. Everything is running smoothly on that front, right? Yes, Harold replied, nodding. I just wanted to be sure. I'll leave you to it, but if there's anything I can do to help, don't hesitate to ask. I'm really sorry about you and Eleanor. I'd heard rumors, but I didn't realize things had gotten so serious. I just want you to know I'm here for you if you need anything. As Harold was leaving, my secretary informed me that I had a visitor without an appointment and asked if I wanted to meet with him. She mentioned his name, Reverend Nathaniel Hayes. Before I could respond, the doors swung open, and in walked a towering man, carrying a Bible in one hand and speaking loudly. Of course he will see me. I am on the Lord's business. I seek to prevent a serious error. I started to rise from my chair, ready to eject this intruder from my office, but I froze in shock. Of all the people, it was the man who had been with my wife. I couldn't believe his audacity, coming to my office, claiming to save my marriage, after being one of the men involved with Eleanor. Was he oblivious? Or had she kept quiet about the CDs I had of their affair? I turned to my secretary and said, "Anna, call security and the police. Get this man out of the building immediately and make sure he never sets foot in here again." The Reverend sputtered, threatening to call down God's wrath on me for blocking his righteous duty to help a member of his flock as security escorted him out. A few minutes later, my security chief, Stephen, came into my office and reported that the man had been removed. "Stephen," I said, "that man claimed to be Reverend Nathaniel Hayes. I need you to find out which church he pastors and gather whatever information you can on him. His background, his work, anything. I want it as soon as possible." "Tom, is it really that big of a deal? You know how preachers can be. He probably thought he was just trying to help you and Eleanor through a rough patch. After all, he mentioned that Eleanor was a member of his church. Stephen, you know that Eleanor and I don't typically go to church. If he's trying to help one of his flock, he should be going to her, not me. Plus, I don't like the guy, and I want to know more about him, in case I have to deal with him again." 3 days later, Stephen returned with the information about Reverend Hayes. He ran a fairly large church in the town where Eleanor and Brian had stayed at the Holiday Inn. I smiled to myself and thanked Stephen. After he left, I called Roy into my office. "Roy, I think it's time for some payback. Want to help? I don't think it'll cause any issues, but if it does, I'll cover you." Roy seemed hesitant at first, but after a moment, he said, "Yeah, I'm in. What do you have in mind?" By the time I finished explaining my plan, Roy was grinning ear to ear. Hell, a man can't get into trouble for going to church, right? The following Monday, when I walked into the office for my usual coffee and the morning update, I found Roy and most of the team gathered around the conference room table, some looking shocked, others, those in the know, laughing. It turned out that when the congregation arrived for services at Reverend Hayes's church that Sunday morning, they were greeted by a surprise. Pictures of the Reverend, very clearly identifiable, were posted in several prominent places around the church. These images showed him in intimate situations with Eleanor. In addition, the deacons found letters in their cars that morning, informing them that the church was being sued for the Reverend's role in the alienation of affection that had torn apart my marriage. Each letter offered suggestions on how the church could mitigate the cost of the lawsuit, and naturally, the church's leaders were eager to find a solution. The Reverend was removed from his position before he could even deliver that day's sermon. To make matters worse, 2 members of the congregation were excommunicated. From what I heard, Eleanor and Brian barely managed to escape to their cars. As for the Reverend, he had to hide from his extremely angry wife, as did Brian. It was a delicious bit of irony. With the public attention and the evidence stacked against her, Eleanor signed the divorce papers without contesting it. As part of her atonement, she agreed to sell me her share of the house and her business for a fraction of their value. I sold the house and hired a manager to run the business. After the divorce was finalized, Eleanor moved to another state. Over the next few months, I gradually brought my funds back from overseas, and life began to return to normal, except for the painful emptiness left in my heart when the love of my life shattered everything. Like many men in my situation, however, I found that women now see me as a valuable catch. Women I once considered distant acquaintances are suddenly eager to reconnect. I've received invitations to countless events, from dances to potlucks. Even some of my friends and employees are trying to set me up with their single friends. I have a feeling I won't have much trouble filling the void Eleanor left behind. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.